Yeah, I'm over here. If you ever see me looking away from the monitor or look, I'm not ignoring you. I'm not distracted. I'm writing my notes and I'm
Of
making sure
course,
the pen doesn't fall off the paper.
of course, that's no problem whatsoever. Well, thank you so much for creating the space and time for us to connect and, being part of the LinkedIn community group and sharing stories. And it's amazing what you're doing.
Oh, thank you. And I am so grateful that you're giving me the time to do this. Love it. All right. I love to start the interviews in the honor of insights. I want to know more first about your origins, your background, and like what were you experiencing and witnessing as you were growing up before you started your career?
So my origins, I am of Zimbabwean descent. And I say it that way because I was born in the UK. So, but when I was born stateless. So both my parents were not British permanent residents or citizens of Great Britain. So the British laws deemed me non-British. And so when we returned to Zimbabwe through immigration, it was also stamped in my mom's passport that I am not a Zimbabwean citizen. So the moment I was born, no country offered or conferred me citizenship immediately. And so
Right.
that's my story of being stateless and my story of how the arbitrary laws of the world can have huge detrimental impacts on children, on families.
Absolutely. And the fact that we are living in a time when it's not just a couple people that this is happening to, there are millions and millions of people impacted by this. Definitely more than what any official records are going to be able to
Exactly.
testify.
And you could
Yeah.
see it show up a lot during COVID. So,
Mhm.
we live in a global community. So you have people who are either the father is British, the mom is Australian, the children could have mixed Australian or British citizenship or whichever country they've settled in. And then when it was time for like family, most countries don't have the right to family reunification. So Australia doesn't have that, right? The one of the few continents that has that right is the European Union, which is avant-garde. So the right of family reunification is protected under EU law, which for me is something which is quite avant-garde.
Mhm. Absolutely. The fact that here, like in Australia, where you're at now, this does not exist. And then in the European Union, it's a completely different approach. And all of this is shaping your perspectives and your understanding, not only of yourself, but how you're engaging with the world around you. So tell me more about what it was like for you as a child growing up in this. So when did you start to realize that your circumstances were different?
It was immediate because when we returned to Zimbabwe, I was only 1 year, 8 months. But my
Mhm.
parents raised me speaking English as my first language. And so in Zimbabwe, English isn't the first language of most people. Shona is.
Mhm.
So the first time, of course, is when you have kids come over to play and there's already a language barrier. I'm different. I didn't feel like I'm different. I just knew that they spoke a different language to I. When you're a child, you can't, it doesn't prohibit from playing. But for me, it really hit home when I went to school. When I went to school, I expected most people to speak English because that's how our family structure had been in the home, in the church. Many people spoke English with our close friends. And then when I went to school, the realization was that most people actually speak Shona and that our family was the one that was different.
Mhm. So you're growing up in this environment where most of the people are speaking Shona, and you're one of the few or the only one speaking English, and you're it's inhibiting your ability to really communicate and build a sense of community with those around.
Absolutely. It was particularly at school, but in the home, my mom and my dad did an amazing job, because we had friends who looked like us, African, Zimbabwean, but they also had that experience of going overseas, or maybe one of their children had been born in the States or England. So, and then the church we went to was a whole mix as well. So for me, that was what was normal. Some people were born overseas, some people were born in Zimbabwe, and we mix. But our main language to communicate was English. Um, so within my family structure, it was amazing. I loved it. It was when I left the home that it was like going into a minefield. Because of
Mm.
course, when you speak English, and if most people speak Shona, what do you think the kids are thinking? Why do you think you're better than us? Oh, you must be so rich. My family wasn't rich. My mom and dad were social workers. We were very low middle class, but we just had a different worldview, a different kind of access to education that at that time that most hadn't been afforded.
And as a child, no one teaches you really how to navigate these instances. So, how were you responding when you were facing this judgment?
I had a few coping mechanisms. I think the first one was isolating myself. So, people didn't spend time to get to know me. So my reputation was based on an assumption. So for me, that's dangerous. So the way that I relate to that, it's dangerous. I'm not known. I'm not seen.
Mhm.
I'm not known for who I really am. So isolate, keep quiet, were the tools I had. The third one as well is during that time, because I was going to church, I also then had my God. So for me, I found strength in that I had um, a religion. And in that religion, it taught me to be loving, it taught me to be kind, it taught me to be strong. So that you could say was my strength in addition to my family.
And this is coming from a religious tradition. And speaking as someone who also grew up in a very religious household, I don't want to make assumptions about what kind of thoughts or values that were being preached in your home. So I would love to dive into that as well. But at least for mine, I remember growing up in a very fundamentalist Christian household where gay is evil, and you're very transparent about the fact that you are gay, and you recently came forward and talked about your husband and everything. So give me a sense of because it is going to tie into your journey, give me a sense of like you have this idea of God as being loving and providing you strength and it's in all this, but give me a sense of what was being taught to you about God.
It was being taught everywhere because Zimbabwe is a very Christian or religious Christian country. So God is being taught at home, at school, in the banks, in the shops. You'll hear Christian music in many places, everywhere. People go to church. If you don't go to church, it's like there's something wrong with you. So the whole context of society, there's no separation between God and anything else in any part of the system. So unlike France, where you might have the separation of the church and the state, and the whole idea of religion being private, that's not the case in Zimbabwe. Religion is part of breathing.
Mhm.
So the whole idea of that something could be separate did not exist for me. But what I did know, it was that it was my journey. It was my job to deepen that connection with God. And so I think there are a few things that showed up. My mom and my dad, because my dad trained in a theological college, but he was non-denominational. So at home, would read the Bible, would pray, but would also discuss what was in the Bible. But one of the values of my mom and my dad was that we got to have a voice, we got to engage, we got to ask questions in a culture where children don't. Children should be seen and not heard. And then at church, of course, Sunday school, I loved it. It was great fun. You read the Bible, you play, you do your coloring. And so I felt it was mostly wholesome. But of course, as I started growing up, um, you don't, I don't know any different. But as I started growing up, there'll be things that might sound different, particularly in the African churches, the way women are treated, or an uncle getting drunk, or hearing about cousins going to see the witch doctors, or traditional healers, I should say. Um, so there were also contradictions because even amongst a so-called Christian country, there were also many people practicing African beliefs, or people doing odd things. Like my uncle, whom I loved, married a second wife, and
Mm.
that was very strange because he would go to church. Didn't he know the impact? How did this happen? Like all those questions would form in one's head. So it would be like there's something not quite right. Do people actually follow God, or are they, as you know, at the time as a child, I wouldn't have had the word hypocrite, but odd people doing odd things is what
Mhm.
I would say.
So you're noticing the differences between what is being preached in the church versus how people are genuinely living their lives.
Correct.
There, what age did you really start to pinpoint that, or
From the very beginning,
very beginning?
very beginning. It's why, because when you're different and when you're raised in a culture that's so different from the rest of the culture, you notice things. You're given the eyes to see the difference.
Mhm.
So I had eyes to see the difference. And in a culture where I'm in my family home where I'm trained or raised to that it's allowed to question, I questioned. But I think the part that I've never mentioned, and I don't think I've mentioned anywhere, I remember when I was 3 years old, and we were living in Bulawayo, which is in a shanty town called Chabalala. And I remember being on my knees and praying and asking God, and I said to God, please let me remember everything. Please let me remember everything. So I think that part of my personality in any case is that I'm curious. I've always been. And even my husband, like when we walk down the streets, he calls me the inspector, the unofficial councillor or mayor of the neighborhood I live in, because I'm always inspecting. Like I notice the difference, the car parked on a different street, the road works, the changing of the water pipes, who's moved in or who hasn't, the people who have a good energy and those who don't, the people who I feel really love each other and those who are making it in the relationship. I've always been like that, and it's happening to me rather than it's I've always been that way. And when I just noticed it, because my husband really points out that characteristics of mine. So
Sweet.
nurture, or whether that's just how one of my values or how I was born, question mark.
The fact that your husband is able to serve as like this mirror for you, especially as you're living your day-to-day life, is so valuable.
It
I would
is.
love to get to know more about how the two of you even met, but before we get into that, let's talk about the classic question for every LGBTQ person out there is when did you know? When did you realize it?
Um, that's it. I I didn't have an event. I would say maybe I'll put it in a few phases. Growing up in Zimbabwe, there's no conversation of gay, so I didn't think I was gay. Didn't know I was gay. Um, So even when you tease somebody as like gay, it was more like a joke rather than an accusation of who I am. And even when you tease somebody of gay, you don't. It's like it was unimaginable to even conceive of two men, two women, trans men, trans women. That was not you can't even. That's not even a thinking I had. It didn't exist. In short.
Right.
Um, I do remember a girly, in quotes, girly boy coming to school, and people accused him of being gay, but I was like, they're just being mean. That's what, you know what I mean? So for me, I couldn't even conceive that that I just thought anybody who's different is called gay as a slang word, you know. Um, so that continued. That was the depths of my denial, as you can imagine. So how I covered up my sexuality without even knowing it is I'm different. English is my first language. I think differently. Our family values. So of course, people are going to target me and say mean things to me, you know. And then coming to Australia, you know, I came to Australia when I was 16 years old. It was wonderful. No, there was no teasing. Completely, like the students were just so great in making me feel welcome and curious. It was the first time I'd been in a classroom where people were willing to try and willing to see me for who I really am. And it's kind of like in Australia, people just mind their own business. And Australia is like it's also a conservative country. It's not necessarily a liberal country with a small L. It's traditionally it's very conservative. And so none of that showed up. It was then in my 20s when I'm having wet dreams of guys and I'm thinking this is going to change, this is just a phase. Um, I remember um, masturbating and thinking this is wrong, this is evil. And so even when I was still going to church in my early days of coming to Australia, you know, I was in the pursuit of dating a girl for the first time, and that was exhilarating. But I never wanted to touch her hand or kiss her. There was zero arousal. But I thought that meant that I was a very good boy.
Mhm.
It didn't, for me, it didn't translate to I'm gay. So I was on the well-trodden path of fulfilling my destiny, which was you date a girl, you get married and have children. Like that was the next phase of my life, and I never questioned it. And then it all came to a head when in 2005, when I went to France, I went to France on exchange. I, you know, this is when the French men started approaching me. I'm like, what the is going on? why, it's like, why am I? But by the way, I'm doing things already to cover up. I know at some level there's something different with me. So the thoughts I'm having are like, walk like a straight man, have a deeper voice, don't be too girly, wear baggy clothes. So I'm already doing these things to cope, but I would never allow myself to even make the connection or think that I'm gay. It was more like I'm not a real man or I stand out. I just don't fit in with men. The idea of, a bloke. And well, today, so that was like the context. So then France, I had to then confront my sexuality because many men kept on approaching me. And it was traumatic
Mm.
because if you grow up in a culture where, first of all, gay is criminalized, there's no conversation of it. And what if I really am gay and without people telling me necessarily, you already know gay is wrong. It's the whole culture. In the silence, you know it's wrong. In um, the unsaid, in the way people respond or using the gay slur, you know that it's like evil. And then from time to time, you hear it in the church. that how evil being gay is. So I don't want to be evil. What do we do with evil? We eradicate it. So I couldn't be gay because that's the whole sphere and state. And then if I am gay and that's who I really am, then God has made a mistake. So those are the thoughts and feelings. It's like, oh my God, we say God is perfect, God is loving. What the fuck? Why did he make me gay? He says, oh, we're made perfectly in his image, but it says being gay is wrong. So obviously I haven't been made in his image. There's been a mistake. So those are the kind of things you're thinking about, and there's no solution. There's no hope. I don't know anybody who's gay. Zero. I'm 21 years old and I know nobody, I know nothing. So in essence, my relationship with gay was to be gay, you die. You get ostracized. You're going to be isolated. No opportunities. Family will abandon you because they've got to. Even though it's going to be painful for them, they've got to live out their faith. That's how that showed up for me.
It showed up for you with so much trauma and the fear of being different. Where did the bravery come from? And what was the process of you saying and realizing I'm gay?
The men approaching me in France was like the line in the sand. I couldn't live like this. So I remember being approached in Nice by a guy. And for me, I've never like thought, is this person gay or is this person? I have a bias towards everybody straight. It's like it's a complete bias. Like somebody could be like literally exude or even be flirting with me, but my bias is still straight. That's how the depths of denial can be. So he approached me, said, wanted to have coffee. I said, yep, great. For me, I'm thinking it's great to practice my French. But then he sat right next to me, started holding my hands, caressing it, telling me like that. My hand was so soft. And I'm frozen. I'm thinking, what is going on here? And I was filled with shame, disgust. And I was like, I don't know what's going on. There were just too many incidences of men approaching me. So this is when I was like, God, when I go back to Australia, I'm going to have sex with men to discover who I am for myself. So that was then the split between religion and myself because I didn't think that they could coexist together. Because if I'm to question my sexuality, that means I have to separate myself from religion. And that was like the thing that had given me comfort my entire life is the thing I'm now separating from. And I'm 21 years old. So come back to Australia, I think it was early days of gay.com. And so I go on, create a fake profile, meet a guy, we hook up. It was awful. And I felt disgusted. I could smell him on me for like the next 2 weeks. And then I promised myself never to do it again. And then I'm back again doing it, then back again. But I was so scared. I had a fake name, fake background. And because I didn't even accept I was gay, I was just like, now I'm like having sex with men. So I'm still in the world of I'm going to get married, have children. This is just something that's happening right now. And I can't ruin my career, my family, my standing. So I was even in denial while having sex with men that I was gay. It was just sex with men. But for me, it was like I'm being sinful and I'm doing something disgusting. And the worst part is that I liked it. And then there was the shame because I couldn't reconcile it with that being there's nothing wrong with being gay because that's not the communication. The communication, my programming is still there's something wrong with being gay. Then within 6 months, probably within the first 6 months, I've slept with over 50 men. And after 6 months, I became very ill. And my foot started swelling. By the next morning, I was in excruciating pain, had to be rushed to hospital. I'm screaming in excruciating pain. They put me even on a morphine drip. And this is the first time. So then the doctors come and they ask, are you sleeping with, do you have sexual relations with men or women? And I'm like, holy moly, holy moly. I'm in so much pain. And I'm thinking, I'm actually going to die. But I need the doctors to do the proper tests. I'm like, am I HIV positive? Is this the punishment from God? And of course, being HIV positive in that time is a death sentence, 2005. And growing up in Zimbabwe, where in the early 90s, 1 in 4 adults were HIV positive, and it had the highest infection rates in the world, and people are dying every week, cousins, uncles, aunts. So there's another layer of shame and terror, and I'm all alone. I have no family here. So I whisper, sex with men, and the shame, flooded with shame. And then 8 doctors come that day and ask me the same question. And every single time, it's profound shame and then rage that I'm being asked the same question. And I rage. So that was the first time I felt I had to publicly admit my action. And I was very sick for a very long time, about 3 months, and on very strong padded and fought every practically 4 hours. And then it all came to a head when my friend from university came to visit me while I was sick. And she said, you know, um, we hadn't been close then, but she came to visit me in my home. And I think, I can't remember who said it first, but she was like telling me she was a lesbian. And I was so shocked because I was like, how could this beautiful woman, so intelligent, be a lesbian? Then I whispered to her, I am gay. And that was the first time. And she's my best friend today. We met on the 3rd of March, 2003, and we have grown. And in that relationship down the track, we promised ourselves 3 things. We wouldn't take drugs to escape our life. We would be the best role models for other gay people. And we wouldn't kill ourselves. Those were the 3 things. Because that's what this is all about. She's Jewish, not conservative Jew, liberal Jew. But even for her, having grown up in Australia, even for her having gone to some of the finest schools in the country, there was still that fear. But we had each other. That was the first time I had emotional support in that way.
What was the
Oh,
what
and
was
by the
the
way, I think I'm HIV positive, but I'm not. But the doctors didn't find, and this is the worst part. And then all the tests, and I had some of the finest doctors and teams in Melbourne working on me. They found nothing. They couldn't find anything. And so for me, the only conclusion was that I'm being punished by God again.
coming out of all this? What were you doing to really embrace this new aspect of yourself that now you're, and how did that impact you?
I didn't embrace it. That's number one. I'm an African gay man who has living in Australia on a student visa. I'm very vulnerable. I know nothing. I'm vulnerable. So there's nothing to embrace. This is a horror. This is not like it's time for me to embrace it. Because then the questions then are, if I am gay, there are many things. As you can tell, I think deeply. Then it's like, if gay is not wrong, number one, what other values have I been raised in that I have accepted or don't even know accepted, but don't work? So it's an identity crisis that I'm having, not an embracing. I'm being broken apart here.
Being broken apart. Walk me through walk me through the process of this break.
Yes. And so being, like you said it, being broken apart had to be then put together in a way that's empowering. So my gay story is my journey to freedom. It's my journey to forging my own path. Hence my book, Dreams, Forging My Own Path.
I'm actually really excited about that book too. I was looking through your profile and I saw that you were writing it, and I was set myself to get something.
Thank you. So it's many years of forging my own path. So I had to find safe spaces where I can be myself, just being the first, then my friends at university, then flying to England to come out to my brother. That was a disaster because I was so scared and I was using sex to numb pain. So he caught me having sex with somebody in his own home. And so that was how I came out to him. And then flying to South Africa with my friend after finished university to come out to my family. So I took a support person, my friend, because there was the risk of that I'd never see my family again. So this is now the reintegration where I'm saying, this is who I am, and who I am has consequences, not just for me, but for others. But I'm not going to back down. I'm not going to live life based on other people's ideas of who I should be. I'm now going to live my life on my idea of who I am. So it was very bold. It was very courageous. I know it. And it's not um like courage, like there's no false modesty around it because the stakes were high.
Your life was literally on the line.
Yeah. And that was
And
not conceptual for me.
this was happening in your home country, well, like your home, like the country of Zimbabwe, or you mentioned
So
South Africa.
yeah, so my by that time, because I left when I was 16, then maybe 4 or 5 years later, my parents and my sister moved to South Africa. Many Zimbabweans in South Africa because of the failed, it's a failed state, in my opinion, the Zimbabwean crisis. Um, but there's still the risk of being ostracized and then telling my uncle many years later that I'm gay, who lives in Zimbabwe. And, that was a 4-hour conversation. And he was amazing because this is my mom's half brother. But in our culture, there's no such thing as half brother. So it's my mom's brother. And, you know, he was like, a lot in the world has changed. If we've gone through women's rights, then who am I to judge gay rights? And this is very important because what my uncle says is what happens, what goes in the village. And I remember saying to him loving me, accepting me, and I asked him point blank, I said, so when I do have my partner, is he going to be welcome in your home? Because you can have words versus actions. And I'm a man of action. And he was like, your partner is always welcome. So for me to hear that from a Zimbabwean male, my uncle, was significant because what he says also transforms the village. So maybe other gay boys, lesbians, or whatever you want to call the community, maybe they'll have a safe space inside of that conversation of my uncle in Zimbabwe because I got to be brave.
Incredible. I would say so too.
And that's fulfilling the promise that Jeff and I had. together. And by the way, I have no morality about taking drugs or anything like that. For me, it's like taking drugs just lowers my consciousness. So I wanted to be fully present for it all. So there's no morality around any of it. Even suicide, I have no morality around it. I get it. There's so much pain. You want to kill yourself. I know what that's like.
Me too. Wow. So you're going through this, your uncle embraces you, and at least in the space of your uncle, you're safe. Tell me more about tell me more about what it was like for you finding out about like essentially finding your husband and what that journey was like.
Ah. So, um, I think so for me, finding my husband is like the impossible happening. That's what it's like for me. So, you know, when I started exploring my sexuality, what I didn't know was that the way then I experienced sex was then a coping mechanism. So I'm having lots of sex with lots of people. At the beginning, I'm more interested in forming relationships, but at that time in Australia, and probably still today and in different parts of the world, I wasn't a person to date. I'm a person to experience. It's exotic to have a black person. The first questions are, how big is it? Is it true what they say? So I'm being objectified. So there's the shock of that first and foremost, because I'm wanting to create meaningful connections. And then I'm so demoralized by it. So then I start playing the game too. So I'm I am having lots of sex with lots of people, but I'm also using it to feel like I belong. I'm using sex for my self-worth. I'm using sex for my self-esteem, but I don't know that. And that was the making of being a sex addict. So in 2020, then I discover and how I know is like the behaviors that I was doing that were dangerous, that were not safe, putting myself into risky situations. And I know that they're risky situations. And once I tried to stop, I couldn't. So I thought I just had a moral issue. And then I read this amazing book called Cruise Control, Sex Addiction by a Gay Man. Cruise Control, Sex Addiction of a Gay Man by Dr. Robert Weiss, who himself is gay. And I was in South Africa at that time and in a different relationship. And I'm reading this book and I'm thinking, oh, I'm just going to read this book because maybe it's going to help somebody in my network. But probably reading a book because I needed the help. And literally, when I read every page, I'm like, this is me. Oh my God, I don't have a moral issue. I'm very sick. I'm no different from a cancer patient. I'm very, very sick.
Mm.
And there's a solution. And that was the first time I had hope because in all my relationships, I've cheated on boyfriends, I've given boyfriends STIs, I've always known they're going to come to an end. There's this knowing. I've never been fully vulnerable in those conversations in my relationships. So there's always this knowing that it's always going to come to an end and I'm fuck it up somehow. And the book, there are stories that are exactly like mine. So I was able to identify. And as soon as I got back to Australia, I started a 12-step program. I found a 12-step program, Sex Addicts Anonymous, and started working the steps, found a therapist, two therapists, and both of them were like, you have complex PTSD. You're no different from a person who's gone to war in Vietnam. And
Oh,
that's
wow.
shocking. That's shocking to hear. That's trauma. That's the whole trauma of growing up in Zimbabwe, being in a repressive society, the inability to actualize. And this trauma in a lot in the gay community, but we don't even talk about it. And so I feel so grateful to have found my medicine. So I work at top of the program every day. Because if I don't take my medicine, like a person who's sick, I will go back to unhealthy behaviors. Because that's how my brain, that's the neurochemistry of my brain. My brain is no different from a heroin addict. Because
Mm.
then sex, I'm not using sex just for the pure pleasure and enjoyment of it. I'm using sex to get high. And the thing is, I may look like a normal person to you, sound normal, but the way I think of life is always trying to escape pain because life has been so painful. And so sex was the way, as I said, I didn't want to drink alcohol to escape pain, take drugs. But in the end, I have been taking a drug and I don't have to take it from external. It happens inside of me. And it's science, it's proven.
So I still want to continue, but I need to move my
Of
computer. I am
course.
at this lovely house. I am cat sitting for one of
Oh,
my friends.
lovely.
So like I'm out on this nice little patio, but there is no charging port, and my laptop just. So you were talking about how so you talked about realizing that you were a sex addict and the
Yes,
treatment that you got from this. And how does this eventually lead to you finding the
my
man who
husband. Yes.
becomes.
So as I'm working my program, and the solution, I just want to be clear what the solution is for addiction. It's a spiritual solution. It's a higher power. It's actually so for a healthy understanding, it can be anything. Some people's higher power is the doorknob. So for me, I find I had to change my belief systems about God. And for me today, it's a loving God. Doesn't matter what I do, don't do, I'm loved. But that was a journey in itself. So, in a world where we're always trying to fix something, control something, this is where it was bad news. I didn't want anything to do with God, but I was so desperate.
Mhm.
And in the journey of being desperate, I've come to have a healthy relationship with myself, a healthy self-esteem, being connected. The opposite of addiction is connection.
Mhm.
So I was able and have been able to do that. And it takes work every single day. But some of the things that happened was I remember going on a date. This was last year, and um, there were a few things that was not quite working. It always seemed that whenever I went on a date, people couldn't understand my worldview. I may sound Anglo-Saxon culturally, but I'm more than that. I'm
Right.
not Anglo-Saxon. I may spend most of my life in an Anglo-Saxon Eurocentric environment, but I'm more than that. I'm Zimbabwean, I'm Australian, I'm culturally British. I'm worldly. I'm well read. Um, so I remember going on a date. The guy was great, but then he was in a relationship, and I was like,
Mm.
"What the like, like what is that?" And I remember doing my journaling. I journal nearly every day, and I drew the line in the sand. I said, "No more. I'm not dating anybody who is not emotionally available, not intellectually available, not spiritually available, not sexually available." And I was like, "No more. I'm no longer," and I call them the scraps of intimacy because that's a scrap.
Mhm.
So I had that enlightenment about my own conduct in dating. I was going after scraps.
Mhm.
So I'm like, no more. I literally was like, I'm done with that. It's like my way that or the highway. Like I'm done because that's like us. This going after scraps is like the survival. It's like I'm in a famine. So I'm like, no more. So, but the past 4 years, I've been really working on my self-esteem, loving myself, being empowered, da 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 da. So inside of that, the way I started dating was very different. And it was two things for me. It was like, I'm looking for to be intimate relationships. When I say intimate, I don't mean sex. And also having fun sexually. And I've never been able to allow myself to say, I want to have sex because the shame would show up. It's just like shame. It's like for me to even have that as a need based on my past. But I'm no, I do want that. I have to be honest with myself, but I want intimacy and sex, those two things. And then, I met my husband at a gay social event and um, we met, but it was very healthy. We had, I remember when we met, he put his hand on my chest, on my heart. And it was the first time I felt like regulated, safe. His energy was good energy. So I'm not thinking about relationship here. I'm comfortable in I'm just here for creating intimacy and sex. I love my life the way it is. I have a good life. I'm thinking at that stage in my life that I'm probably going to be pansexual. Is it pansexual? I don't even know the terminology. Having more than one relationship with many people.
Mhm.
What do they call that? Whatever they
Oh,
call that.
like the polyamorous,
Yeah,
that kind of.
polyamory. Yeah, polyamorous. Like I'm thinking I'm going to be polyamorous. Different men, different contexts. I probably have men I go out dating with, men I probably have dates and have sex with. Like that's how I'm thinking. I may have a primary relationship. Because for me, then my thinking again is like even monogamy doesn't make sense. Like if there's intimacy and connection and you want to experience it at a sexual level, why not?
Mhm.
That's literally how my brain thinks. It's like abundance, intimacy. Uh, Um, So there's more than one way. That's the forging of the path, isn't it? Um, and so we started. So then my game with any person I was dating was I'm going to treat all the people I'm dating in the way I wish I'd been treated. So when my husband came over for the first time, I cooked him a meal. There was food. I'm also autistic as well. So sleeping with somebody in the same bed is deregulating for me. So I set up this room for him so that he can stay the night if he wished to, etc. So I treated him the way I wish I'd been treated. Um, and that was great. He spoke very little English, but our communication was very high, which is amazing. Um, and then he came over again, same thing. And then I remember once I was going to go, he was coming over, and then I was going to go for a run and with the gay running group because I also run. And he was when he came over, I was like, yep, if you want to stay the night, you can. But, after we have sex, I'm going to go running. And then he was very upset. He says, but I've come in his broken English, but I've come here. He's Brazilian. So, passionate. I've, it's taken me 2 hours to come here. It's taken me 2 hours to come and spend time. Then he was like, but okay, if that's what you want to do. And this I say this is my autism, but my husband says I play the autism card too often. But for me, it's just like, oh, he actually likes me.
Oh,
It did not, it had not occurred to me that this person liked me. And we're having a good time. Like we're having great conversations. I had my own boundaries. Like I never talked about my life. When he asked me about my life, I'm like, I'm a simple person. I'm a geek. I love reading. I love writing. That's my everyday life. And I was like, I don't talk about my past. And one of the reasons I don't talk about my past is that people can get enamored. People start dating the story of Rugare Gomo rather than the person who's Rugare Gomo.
mhm.
And the person who's Rugare Gomo is a geek. I like having deep, meaningful conversations. I like talking about serious subjects. I read widely. And I like talking about what I write about. That's my everyday life. And yes, I have a story, but that's
Yes.
my past. It's not who I am. or I am on a day-to-day basis. It's very routine. I'm going to go for my chai latte after this, do my journaling. I'm going to probably thank my higher power for it. Like, it's so amazing that you and I even get to connect, from different parts of the world, where like, there's been so much isolation, and to meet good, decent people, meeting Eric Woodby, like my life is expanding. Like just like you were saying, like how grateful you are that just by doing these stories, it's expanding. Mine is too by writing my book. You know,
Mhm.
it's joyous. It's overwhelming. Like life is so overwhelmingly beautiful, and that's because I'm brave, and that's because you're brave. I don't know your story, but I know you're brave. That's going to
Oh,
be a story for another time. So it's overwhelming.
Mhm.
So
Yes.
if this is what it is like, it's already enough. I'm nourished. It's amazing. But in the past, I didn't even think this could be possible. You understand? So with Ego, coming back to Ego, then he went away to Hawaii and Mexico, and I missed him dearly. And it was amazing. And then I went to Indonesia for my personal holiday. Um, and my sponsor was like, you've been like creating intimacy. I'm being open, I'm creating intimacy. Ego is an amazing person. And my sponsor is like, well, this could be a person you could be in a relationship with. Because I don't make any decisions without consultation with my core people either. And it's how I live in any area of my life. And I make the decision, but I consult. And I'm like terrified because I'm like, I think I'm still that kind of douchebag from the past who goes after scraps of intimacy, put other people at risk. I can't be vulnerable and share my heart. Nobody's going to understand. Nobody has a similar worldview to I. But Ego did, and he's demonstrating it. And I'm setting my boundaries in a way I've never set boundaries with another human being, and they're being respected. So even like the idea of, yes, we can have sex, but we're going to sleep in separate bedrooms, I wasn't shamed. Ego has never shamed me, ever. So it was being in a relationship, I felt safe. And even when we slept in the same bed, it was the first time I wasn't deregulated
Wow.
as well. So many different aspects of this relationship and this person were showing healthy green flags, green flags, green flags. When I'm in Indonesia, I call him, he's house sitting for me from time to time. And I say, ask him to be my boyfriend. And he says yes.
Oh, wow.
But I know asking him to be my boyfriend isn't asking him to be my boyfriend. I know I'm asking him to create life together for the rest of our lives. I know. And that's what that this was the most scariest decision. I've made many scary decisions in my life, but this is scary. This is one of the scariest decisions I've ever made because all I have as evidence, what evidence do I have that I could be a good boyfriend? Zero. I'm 38 years old. From the time I was 21 to the time I'm what, 2020, however, that is 34, I've only had unhealthy relationships. When I got into recovery, I had one healthy relationship. I'm dating, I'm able to set my boundaries, but in terms of healthy relationship, I'd had one. So I'm not like, I don't have any evidence I can do this. So it's like a jump. It's like jumping into a different universe. So I come back from Indonesia. He requests that I ask him properly in person. So we do that. And then I know it's creating life. And so then he moves in July, and I propose to him probably either in July or in August. And I do it in my traditional style. I write him a letter. and I watch him read the letter. I get the letter translated into Portuguese because he's Brazilian. And I just watch him. And then at the end of the letter, he gasps
Oh,
with shock, and he accepts and proposes to me. And we were married in October. So within 6 months, we were married. Best decision of my life, best chance on myself. Once I asked him, all the fear of who I could be disappeared. I know I have everything I need to have an extraordinary relationship. And we have an extraordinary relationship. There's lots of love, there's lots of intimacy. We catch up together, we enjoy it, we build each other up. I'm a witness to his life, he's a witness to mine. We're not enmeshed. He's his own person, I'm my own person, but together we are so fucking powerful and so grateful for that. It's a privilege. It's a privilege and honor to be his husband. Yeah.
that's good. Wow. You literally go from this person who's even afraid of intimacy with another man, and now you're in a loving and caring relationship with someone who, like, you could be your most authentic and vulnerable self with.
Yes. Everything. He knows everything. Everything.
Oh my
Everything.
God. That's hard. That's like something that people always say they want, and like self-sabotage gets in the way,
Yes.
and all these other, and then like life circumstances and everything, and you're like,
Yes.
wow, like it eludes so many people, and here you
Yes.
are, you find it.
Yes. And we have guidelines. We have values. And some of our values include freedom. So when talking about anything, we ask the question, is this freedom? When talking to each other, we talk about, is this love? When talking to each other, we're talking about, is this adventure? So we have values. We have shared values that we mapped out, that we so even like we may be married, but the question even inside of expressing sexuality is, what does freedom look like sexually? Because we may be different. We want that, but we have those conversations. We do not shy away. We have them, and sometimes they're hard, but boy, oh boy, because we've had so many, the trust, the intimacy is, I used to frown and look down on those couples who'd be like, I can't live without you. But for me, it's like, that's disgusting and that's idiotic.
Mhm.
I am that person today. I
Wow.
literally cannot imagine life without him. Like, that is like, I couldn't imagine the void that would be there, because it's like the nourishment and the goodness has been so good. It's like a light in the earth being taken away. So of course I go into those spaces. He hates it when I say those things from time to time. But I was that person who's like, there's something unhealthy about your relationship if you think that you can't live with them if they die. That was the kind of person I was. But now I get it.
And what you did is not easy, and it really is. In a poetic sense, I'll call it a radical experiment in authenticity. And
Yes.
all this baggage, and
Yes.
it's not a couple of things. It's like a big old bag. Yes.
It's exactly like that, Justin. It's like, here we go.
Wow. am I'm good with questions.
You're satisfied. Your cup is full.
I was like, wow. I'm just like, whoa. And I'm so excited that you gave me the privilege to share this with people. So thank you. Wow.
No, thank you. Thank you so much for reaching out and for everything you're doing. I'm so grateful. Thank you
Sure.
so much. It's important. It matters. What you do matters.
Thank you.
Mm.
What questions, concerns did you have for me?
I have zero concerns. I'm
Mhm.
completely you're a great interviewer. And not just an interviewer, a great person. You've got great energy. Um, it's you create a safe space. You own yourself, and you ask. So this would be in my top three favorite conversations I've had.
Really?
Yeah,
Oh wow. Okay. Wow. If I ever
I've
need
talked. Yeah.
if I ever need a I ever need to write a list of reviews, I hope I can include that like top three.
Thank you
Alrighty.
so much. Until next time.
Ciao.
Bye. Ciao.